Hello, everyone. My name is Clémence Dallaire. I'm happy to welcome all of you to this Lunch and Learn presented by CASN Research and Scholarship Committee. The presentation of this series focuses on cutting-edge leadership that creates change in whatever area. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. CASN's national office is located on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people, and we would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remain unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region and in all regions across Canada. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. Lunch and Learn are a popular tool in academia to encourage scholarship. Faculty members come together during their lunch hour to share their work and to network. CASN's webinar series presented by the Research and Scholarship Committee aims to create the collegial feel of the Lunch and Learn and is intended to serve as an inspiration and a networking opportunity. Nursing faculty from across the country present on a scholarship project and discuss methodology, successes, or challenges they have encountered in their work. We will be recording today's session, as you heard, and begin with a presentation from our speakers, and we'll conclude with 15 to 20 minutes of question and answer after the presentation. To submit a question that I could address to the speaker later on, please use the chat function. Please note that CASN does not distribute the presentation slides. In this session, we will hear from Dr. Geneviève Thompson from the University of Manitoba, whose presentation is entitled Cutting Edge Leadership That Creates Change in Long-Term Care Setting. Dr. Thompson, thank you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Merci beaucoup. And that's the extent of French that I know. Unfortunately, I have a French last name, but I don't remember enough from my elementary school French, which is a shame. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and I'm really excited to be here. So, as always, we will, we'll do our best. There we go. I hope the slides are coming up. That's wonderful. So, I'm not going to go through the introduction, but just to say that this talk around creating change in long-term care has been something that has been near and dear to my heart for probably at least a decade now. And I've been working with those who live in long-term care, who are dying in this setting of care, as well as those who visit and work there, to really look at how can we make these institutional settings less institutional and really places of joy and positivity. And I've been really fortunate, and I think one of the cutting edge leadership practices that I'm going to share through this was the vision of Riverview Health Center in creating a research chair that was jointly funded by the College of Nursing at the University of Manitoba. And having that seconded 2 days a week to help support practice change has been really instrumental, and just it really is helping to move things forward. And we'll talk a lot more about that as I go on. So the objectives for today, just going to try and close that there. The objectives for today, I'm going to describe a new term likely to many of you, certainly was to me coming to this field, was this idea of person-directed living. What is that? How does it differ from person or resident-centered care? And why we need a shift to this new model of care in long-term care. I'm then going to spend time talking about the role that leadership, education, and research is playing and has played in supporting that change. And then, like you, or I don't know about you, but for me, whenever I go to webinars or I go to workshops, conferences, I always leave feeling really excited. But then I get back to my office and real world work just starts taking over. And I don't ever have a time to sort of sit down and reflect and think about, okay, so how am I going to maybe take some of the things I have learned and make a change. So I hope that we can have some time during those 15 minutes at the end to think about how do you see some of what I've talked about today potentially influencing your organization, your role, maybe your nursing practice or nursing education. So that is my hope for today. I know there was a land acknowledgement done at the beginning, but I too always really feel it's important to just express my gratitude and recognize my privilege of where I live and work. So the University of Manitoba campuses, which is where I'm actually located right now today, but also Riverview Health Center where I work as well, and then my home. And I just want to stop because I came up one time in the spring last year, and I've lived in Winnipeg my whole life, and I'd never seen Northern Lights before. And what a gift and blessing to just be there. And I come up from my underground parkade, and there they were. So I'm always so excited to share that picture. But all of the places where I live and work are located in Winnipeg, which is located within the heartland of the Red River Métis Nation and traditional territories of many other Indigenous peoples of the region. I respect the treaties that were made on these territories. I am a white settler who acknowledges that my ancestors displaced others with their immigration to Canada and were afforded opportunities denied to Indigenous peoples. In my own engagement with reconciliation, I'm aware and will continue to learn of the displacements, socioeconomic and cultural traumas experienced by Indigenous peoples, but also the unique richness and diversity of Indigenous cultures and their resilience. So with that, I'm going to start us off with a very short video that was made by the recreation staff at Riverview Health Center when residents who live there came to them and said, you know, we have really important stories we want to share and we want to talk about and capture. And so this documentary was created. It's called A New Beginning. And on the very last slide, I have a link to the YouTube channel where you can find it. But I just want us to take a moment and think about maybe some of the messaging that these residents are going to share with us.
Hi, I'm just calling to let you know a room is now available at Riverview.
I want to stay in my home as long as possible.
I wouldn't want to be in a care home because it sounds like such a downgrade.
I don't want to be treated like a child, told when to wake up, shower, and take pills.
No, I would never want to be put in a place in a care home. No, I'd rather be dead.
That short clip can evoke some pretty strong feelings and emotions. And it's unfortunately probably what many of us feel if we were told tomorrow that we needed to move into a care home. We know that most would say, no, not for me, thank you. And I think that really does reflect a lot on our larger societal views of feeling about getting old and needing care. So that brings us to then, why do we need a new model of care for long-term care? So I'm not going to really say anything earth-shatteringly new, and it's captured really in that video there when I say long-term care, and I apologize, I'll flip between long-term care, nursing homes. Here in Manitoba, we call them personal care homes, but they all denote the same living environment where it's 24/7 nursing care, it's supportive housing, it's meals, it's receiving medical care as well. But these institutional settings have a really negative and a significant image problem. If we ask anyone on the street, if we reflect on ourselves, and like the video says, no one's begging to move into a long-term care facility, at least not yet. And that is the work that we're really trying to do here. So research myself and some colleagues did, which surveyed 481 people in Manitoba about the role of long-term care in the continuum of care, noted most indicated that having long-term care as an option for either themselves or a family member's future health and social care was really highly endorsed. They saw that long-term care has a significant role to play and is really important. Yet when we ask the question, would you be open to moving into a long-term care facility if the need should arise, few, if any, said that they really would be. The main reason was some of the ones we heard in that video, is that they didn't really, there was a fear that their needs would not be met, particularly physical and social needs, and really around that loss of the ability to make decisions about their daily routines in a long-term care home. What was really interesting in this research was that those living in rural areas were less reluctant to move into a care home. And a finding that we had noted in the past that showed a long-term care facility can be an extension and a real vital part of the community. And one of the things we thought about too, and that's come out of work I've had the privilege of being able to go across the province of Manitoba and talk to residents in long-term care. They really spoke about the relationships, and sometimes even if you were a resident in a care home, you might be being cared for a student, say you taught in high school or elementary, or was your next door neighbor. So there was that real connection and that real familiarity, that relationship that is really important for us to remember and think about as we think about care models that help people thrive. The other piece of why we need a new model of care is the profile of individuals who now move into long-term care is much more complex than in the past. And we've known this now for probably at least a decade. The pattern has really changed. People are much frailer. There's a lot more cognitive impairment. So that, well, they've been living in their own home in the community for a long time. Challenges arise, needs arise, and they move into a care home. And so that status quo of how we've always done things is not really working anymore. We need to think about ways to meet basic care needs that allow people to capitalize on their strengths and continue to live their lives in meaningful and purposeful ways. Care then has to become organized around them, not us, our roles, our routines, or our tasks. We're also really ready to change. COVID-19 shone a huge glaring spotlight on care homes that highlighted a lot of the negativity, but I really want to say too, it showed us our strengths. We recognize the vital role of formal and informal care partners, how critical and not just a nicety, but a necessity that socialization, integration, and daily activities and purposeful activities like recreation and just being part of everyday life is really, really, really important. We also have new standards, not only from the national standards, but here in Manitoba specifically, we are hearing that new standards are rolling out any day, and they're going to be much more focused on putting that person at the center and heart and of everything we do, and really directing their care. And finally, people want change. They don't want to live in a place that's task-driven, that we just focus on being clothed and fed. They want to be able to really say what their life looks like, and so they should. It really has become about a human right approach to care, and people are demanding better, and we can rise to that challenge. So on the screen, what we're talking about is something what in the nursing world we call culture change. And culture change efforts can really be divided into two general categories, sort of the environmental changes as well as then practice changes. And both can run from the surface change, where maybe we're just moving some walls in a facility or changing paint colors to be more neutral, or there's a whole research around paint and color in particular. But the changes can also run very deep as well. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see some examples of some of the environmental changes. And so these are actual different physical models of care, such as small home models that we can build within existing structures. So thinking about how eliminating long corridors, nursing stations, making places into smaller households with shared communal kitchens and living spaces. And then there's actual, where the greenhouse project out of the States in particular, where we're building actual small homes that are centered around a courtyard, communal living, typically maybe 8 to 10 residents that live in a household, have a care attendant that sort of is responsible for cooking, cleaning, helping residents with their daily activities of living, and that's a very different model. And a fair amount of practice change then goes into both. And we don't necessarily need environmental change, but when environments remain unmodified, many practice changes can struggle to succeed and be sustained due to inflexible and centralized processes required. And we see this a lot, and I'll refer to food services. It's a big piece. Food is a critical piece in nursing homes, not just for nutrition, but also socialization. Often our day revolves around meals and mealtime. And some of the ways that that food services have been developed in care homes has become quite inflexible. So people aren't able to deviate. We're not really affording true choice. And so things are really ingrained. And this is a big area of research that's happening in how do we help change and improve mealtime experiences. It can be harder when there's not some of those environmental changes as well, because they don't have sort of the cues that things should be different. And so we revert to ingrained practice. Similarly, environmental changes without practice change generally can't deliver the control and relationship at the core of culture change goals. So some of the ones you may have heard of was the Eden philosophy. Green care farms are really exciting initiatives that have grown out of Europe in particular, where people who are actively with dementia, very advanced stages of dementia, living on functional farms and being a part of that community, harvesting vegetables, caring for animals. Again, then you'll see these farms typically have the small home model where people are living together, preparing their meals together. Really exciting, hoping to see some of that develop more here in Canada. I know that there's starting to be a movement with that as well. There is a whole continuum of culture change that can happen. And I just have this resource here for you if you're interested. It's a great text. It's getting it's 10 years old now, so hopefully a new edition will be coming out soon. But they really talk about this range of, on the left where you've got no culture change, you might do a few things. It's that traditional nursing home style, all the way out to the one that's the most culture change is that greenhouse model, and everything in between. So it's important to realize, excuse me, that some care homes will embark on this journey in incremental steps, not necessarily able to build new, which is really the way that we should be going to look at the small home models. But sometimes we have to deal with and do the best we can with older care homes and thinking about changes that we can do within and really looking at some practice changes then. So this brings me to this idea of this person-directed living continuum. What is it, and how does it differ from some of the terms that you may have heard before? On the far left, the provider-directed and staff-centered are really where a lot of the times we land. And so here it's a very top-down decision where the people who are providing the care are the ones who are making all the decisions. So we may consult a resident about their routine, but it's within that existing routine that choice is offered. And I would almost argue sometimes that the choices we offer, and we've seen this, are not real choices. Is it really a choice if I come to you and say, Jill, you know, for lunch today you can have chicken or fish? I may not want either. And so that is really not person-directed. That is still really staff-centered. It's trying to be person-centered, but the choices are not my choices that I want to choose from. As we move along that continuum, the resident-centered, person-centered is where I think a lot of things are landing now in healthcare, where we begin to organize our routines around the stated preferences and observed preferences of individuals, and we have some influence around decisions and routines. But to be truly person-directed, this is where that person has full control of their day, their choices, and what they look like. And so we're consistently organizing everything to meet that person's needs and preferences. So for example, this might look like, as a healthcare aide, when I come on to my community in the morning, I know who likes to sleep in. I'm not going to disturb them. I know who likes to wake early. And so I will go around and greet those who I know are early risers and go about and negotiate what the morning is going to look like. Who wants breakfast now? Who would like to have a shower now? And really about being flexible realizing that beds don't need to be all made by 9 a.m. People don't need to be all up and in the dining room, but there's a real ebb and flow just based on normal human behavior and patterns and preferences. So this really does differ. And it gets people nervous about thinking about that. And it requires us to really shift from that institutional approach where we, the healthcare team and providers, we direct the care. The hospital, it looks very hospital-like, and we focus on the task. And going down, because this is a big one that we're working on a lot at Riverview, success is defined by getting all the work done. I can attest to this. As a nurse, I can remember it was always my job. I needed to ensure that everything was done before the next shift, because if I left anything undone, people would be upset with me. And this is a huge institutional, what we call institutional dragon that we're trying to slay, because success is not defined by getting all the work done, but we need to really shift that. Success is defined by having a team that you can work with, that the resident has meaningful connections, relationships, and activities. And so it's shifting that mindset. And that's a big one. That's a big challenge to thinking about the fact that not everything needs to get done during days or evenings or night shifts, right? That things can overlap and different people can take things on as we go. Staff working in departments, really, again, this is a big one too, is that it's more cross-functional teams, and thinking about new ways of staffing is going to be probably the way that things are moving with research as well, and thinking about how can we evaluate that. So what is the evidence that any of this matters? Is it really truly important? Well, there is. Over the past decade, there have been several systematic reviews assessing evidence and clarifying the impact of person-centered, person-directed culture change initiatives on various outcomes. Most helpful is a framework by Sear and colleagues that is now 10 years old, but helps to delineate impact in 5 areas that are found on this screen. Well, firm conclusions can't always be drawn because of the variability in study designs, models, population. There is a high positive trend noted when person-centered culture change models are adopted. So for residents, there's really been reported benefits on well-being, improved psychological well-being in particular as it relates to autonomy, increased satisfaction with life, and increased social interaction between residents. For residents living with dementia, similar positive benefits have been noted in including improved self-performance in activities of daily living and physical function, because in this model, we're not stepping in and doing for, we're assisting with. We see a lot of reduced agitation, improved affect, improved relationships between residents and formal caregivers. And this is particularly so in those smaller scale environments, and general improvements in overall quality of life. Staff report increased job satisfaction and work life, especially also with those small home models, but also report decreased stress, burnout, and emotional exhaustion, improved perception of work control, job demands, and social support from co-workers. There's also decreased turnover. In greenhouses, which you have to remember are those on the highest change continuum, staff really report having more time to provide necessary care, and care outcomes are improved. Family care partner outcomes have been less studied, and this is a real gap that needs to be looked at. But in the small number of studies that have looked at families, they indicate they feel more welcomed in these kind of care models and have higher satisfaction with care. Evidence has shown that the greenhouse model does not increase operating costs or construction costs. But greenhouse homes, despite delivering considerably more direct care time per resident, require a third of an hour less total labor inputs than a traditional nursing home. Again, sort of that financial impact has not been well studied, and it is a gap that is needing to be further addressed, specifically in the Canadian context. A lot of the research does come out of the US. We're starting to see, and there's been some recent systematic reviews, I want to say 2024 is as recent, that has included more Canadian literature and has shown some of these really significant impacts as well. So what is then the role of leadership? Excuse me. We've heard about evidence of why we need a culture change, and then thinking then about the role of leaders and leadership in this process. And honestly, in looking at the literature and from anecdotal evidence as well, it really points to the fact that without committed leaders practicing specific types of leadership, culture change will not happen, or it might happen, but it will not be sustainable. Leaders are critical puzzle pieces in supporting culture change. Having committed leadership and devolved leadership where people, staff are empowered to make decisions is vital. So what are some of the specific practices that exceptional leaders engage in that results in success in implementing innovative programming such as nursing home culture change? In their excellent article, Ford, and Pollan outlined the 4 functions of leadership in implementing change. And these functional approaches show that leadership involves creating that clear direction for the change, and that's the visioning piece. Leadership or leaders then organize and coordinate the work involved or structuring. They engage and develop people for its accomplishment through this idea of social integration. And then they attend to events and occurrences in around the change so that appropriate actions can be taken and modifications made. And that's monitoring, and where I see research is really falling into. This doesn't mean that all these 4 functions are satisfied equally or completely or even at the same time. Rather, functions can be fulfilled to different degrees, at different times, by different people during change. It does mean, though, that if leadership emphasizes some functions to the exclusion or detriment of others, they may accomplish the change, but fail to sustain important functions and systems required for long-term integration of the change. A really critical aspect of leadership change and implementing change is communication and education. Communication has to be bi-directional, so that leaders are listening and engaging with those directly involved in the change, but they're also sharing important information that is modified and tailored to those recipients. And we all know education alone doesn't affect change, but it is critical to laying the foundation for change. So in looking at that model, I want to share with you at Riverview what they have done in terms of engaging with change. So the visioning piece, that function, started back in 2021, and I hope you can appreciate the timeline here. I mean, this takes us only up to March 2024, and we have we're into 2025 now. This doesn't happen overnight. And so change is slow and purposeful is really also a critical piece. So that visioning started early on with setting priorities with their board of directors and leadership at all levels. And part of that was their own board of governors decided that they needed a subcommittee which was really looking at how to improve the quality of life of residents, because that is really at the end of it what we are trying to do in implementing person-directed care. From there, they recognized that they needed to have more information, and so they commissioned some reviews to be done to look at what was out there in the research literature, in the gray literature, what was being done in other care homes to help really inform the vision. So they looked at things like the infrastructure, some environmental changes. They brought in an architect that specializes in design for older adults, staff recognition they realized would be really important, branding, and then the person-directed living best practices. Based on that, they adopted a person-directed living model, which I'm going to share with you on the next slide, that set their intention. So set some of that structuring and then the social integration. The other key piece for the leadership change was money. Getting dedicated funding for resources, critical again for change, because that allowed then in the spring of 2023, not only the creation of my position with being a research chair, but also people really dedicated to implementing change. So the person-directed living coordinators and communication specialist. Then really getting into that social integration in July, where there was broad stakeholder engagement. So engaging those on the ground with what was going to be happening, how was change going to be approached. We did some initial surveys around what do you think about person-directed living? What are you afraid of? What are you excited about? And doing more revisions. And then finally, and in that time also really thinking about that monitoring piece. How are we going to evaluate and continue to look at things? And then as well as keeping on moving on from March 2024 until now with rolling out of education and research. And So looking at their practices and functions, you can see that there's lots of people involved in the middle, but looking at change in 4 specific areas to align with that's what I sort of said right at the beginning. So in the terms of the organizational context, you know, really recognizing that this was a organic approach to defining person-directed living. It came from some of the Eden philosophy and work, but it's really meant to be homegrown. Again, looking at commitment, communication planning, and developing a language guide, which is really critical. If we're trying to change how people think, act, and behave, we need to watch what words we're using. So for example, people no longer are admitted, they move in, they live on communities, not units. Those are some of the, just off the top of my head, some of the languages that have really changed. In terms of workplace practices, looking at a staff team learning approach, bringing people together. We've got a whole organizational wide learning plan where people are working through online modules, have embedded evaluation in that, bring people together for one-day workshops to talk about how do we work together and fostering a coaching leadership approach. Care processes, we have teams of influencers on communities to help identify what practices they want to work on. How do we support change? And then for residents, we're trialing things about getting to know me, about me tools, so that we really get to that deep knowing that people is really critical. And then the living environment as well. Because as I mentioned, that environmental change is important. It's costly though, and in this environment to have funding, it can be really hard, but looking at renovations where possible, looking at future plans to have on-site daycare because intergenerational programming is so critical. And they just have started transitioning away from uniforms, which has been a real interesting approach. Some people jumped right on board, others a little bit hesitant. But again, in embedding an evaluation piece with that, once that practice has sort of been allowed to percolate for a little while. On the far hand right are the person-directed living commitments that underpin all of the work. And these areas, respect, relationship, knowing each person, individuals' lives, living and care, autonomy and dignity of risk, really help inform the work that's being done and embedded every day. So the successes then, if we look at really successful change leadership, it's about getting that foundational support, right? Not only financially commitment, but also the board and other leaderships. We're really about finding a way to yes. And this means no request that a resident proposes or a staff is met with an automatic no, we can't do that. But it's really about, okay, that's an interesting thing that you want to be able to use power tools and hang up your own pictures, for example, in your room. Let's talk about that and find a way that maybe we can negotiate that request. I hope you've realized that this has really been about small bites. We're doing pilot studies. I'm going to talk in one moment about some of the research that have been driving change. Leadership team is really committed to and has recognized they have own learning needs about getting more about coaching style and that. This idea about warming the soil. So not just jumping right in and saying this is what we're doing, but talking with those people who are really on the ground that this is going to have significant impact and really being engaged with them. And then navigating and breaking down barriers. We know that there's bigger work to be done in terms of regulations and staffing that we're slowly working on and through. So when we think about the research then, where I've been involved in is to think about how do we measure overall impact and even is that possible? Culture change is so huge and affecting so many different pieces. Are we really truly going to be able to measure overall impact? I think we can measure overall uptake and in that way, but also looking at sustained impact. So these initiatives that have been rolling out, how well have they been maintained? The influencer group, for example, do they still meet once sort of that initial education piece has been rolled out? Lots of people involved, which means lots of different measurement approaches. So for sure, my background is very much qualitative, so really interested in capturing the stories and experiences, but really seeing the importance of using mixed methods, surveys, and design. And then thinking about the team and really including those from Riverview in research and improving their skills and abilities in doing that as well. So in terms of the evaluation outcome and research, there's two things we've been thinking about and I've been doing. One is to do standalone measurement where prior to doing any implementation, we did a baseline staff survey back in July of 2023, and we'll plan to repeat that probably next summer to just see after everyone has received some education, how are people feeling about person-directed living? Has their knowledge of it improved, etc.? We've used a tool called the Artifacts of Culture Change that has communities evaluate domains of change and areas of best practices to see, for example, meal times. Are you still using a tray only? Are you taking items off the tray, setting the table, those kind of things? So we have baseline measures of areas where people feel they're doing well. One of the things I'm really excited about are these small scale quality improvement projects. And through my role with the University of Manitoba College of Nursing, we've embedded nursing students for the last 3 terms to do their community rotation at Riverview. And as part of that, they are part of a community and they do an assessment around what practice change related to person-directed living would that community like to do. And then they engage in a small quality improvement project. And it has been very successful. And one of the ones that just wrapped up the fall term was a relaxed breakfast approach and, offering fresh fruit for residents. And so creating a plan about what that would look like. How do you order food? How do you prepare it and bring it in? And then obviously planning for not one more, but some larger scale research. The other piece has been embedding questionnaires that are available or surveys into already existing practices. So we have a resident family satisfaction surveys. We've added some questions to capture change and perceptions there, say around loneliness in particular, and then using the education that staff are receiving to just see how they feel about their change. One of the pieces I do really want to pick up on, because I think is really thinking about how we engage not just nurses, but also anyone who is in a care home, that's working in a care home, is what I want to say. So this is an older study, but one Canadian study in 2011 found only 5% of mandatory education hours focused on older adult care. And this was for nursing programs. And the course material focused really on a deficiency model, not strength-based. And I know this has been something here in the College of Nursing at the University of Manitoba that my colleagues have been so dedicated and really have focused to really change. But I think we really have to think about using CASN's entry to practice gerontological care competencies and frame how we are educating our future generation of nurses who are going to work in long-term care, and really promoting it as an exciting, dynamic, complex care environment. And those entry to practice competencies, really, I loved that they focus on the relationality and building relationships with residents. And I think that that fits so nicely with person-directed care. The other models, the teaching nursing home, I'm not as familiar with, but maybe some of you are. I just wanted to flag that. But living lab models as well that grow out of the Netherlands, but are spreading, whereby researchers are embedded in a care home, working with a dedicated staff, who then also come into the classroom and teach. And there's this real dualism and sharing of knowledge, and so that the education is embedded in current practice, as well as the research being embedded in current practice. And I think that's a really exciting model to look at, because otherwise we're really trying to change attitudes and knowledge of students who've already received their education. And so is there a way that we can move person-directed approaches into all undergraduate and college and practicum sort of experiences, so that we're not battling an uphill battle? I realize I'm going to leave you with the link for the whole video, because it's just a lovely documentary rather than show it, because I'd love to have some feedback. And as I said, what changes will you make based on today? Did anything resonate with you at all? And as always, there's my email. If you just type A New Beginning Riverview Health Center into YouTube, it will pop up. And the whole video is about 45 minutes long, but it's just delightful and challenging. Some of it's hard to watch, but some of it's really, really inspiring. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to love to hear from people online.
Thank you, Geneviève. A very inspiring, cutting-edge leadership project that you've just presented. And I will leave your question open for participants. I don't see anything in the chat at the moment. It's just yes, one.
Okay, here I do see. Let's see.
How might the proposed person-directed cultural change be affected by the current highly fragmented funding?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think my name counterpart, you raise absolutely incredibly challenging questions in terms of the funding and ensuring it's equitable right across provinces, even and jurisdictions. I come also from the palliative care world where we see this happening as well, right? It's not. And so how can we really ensure? And where I am concerned is that I've seen excellent models of care developing here in my own province. And it's for pay, it's private, right? It's very expensive. So, you know, how do we make this available? It shouldn't just be for those who have the ability to pay. I think it's recognizing that this is how I frame it to my students sometimes. You know, person directed isn't the add-on. It can be as simple as your attitude and your approach when you're coming into a person's room. It's about being friendly. I mean, that's very, very simplistic, but at the very least of it, it's trying to recognize we can build relationships with people and support them. But it's more complex than that. Okay, and I see someone asking about the video. I'm just going to try and copy that for them. So I don't have a good answer for you because I think that that's something that we really need to work on.
Thank you, Geneviève. I think someone has her hands. Sue, would you ask your comments or questions? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Geneviève. That was really, I found it really positive, and I want to thank you because I think some of the work that I've been doing, a lot of what you said resonates. And I think what you provided for us is some really practical, pragmatic sort of strategies that could be helpful, recognizing that change, sometimes we do have to start small. And yes, we all probably want to change the system, right? We all want to see this in every home across the country, but I like how you presented the small examples for practice change, for research, some of the resources as well. And I think those are things I'm going to take away for sure. And I just wanted to comment too on the gerontological competencies. We've been focusing on integrating these in our fourth year curriculum for the last couple of years, like the last 4. Laurie Schindel-Martin started that, but Laurie retired. But I'm quite passionate about keeping them there because I totally agree with you. In the fall, I did I'm not a gerontological nurse by background, but I tried to sell the rationale for why it's important that we teach these skills. And at the end of the class, the students did reflections, and quite a few of them were able to identify that they hadn't necessarily thought about careers in gerontology before the class, but after the class they were considering, or they saw the opportunities that could be positive in working with older adults that didn't have to always be sort of the negative stereotypes. So I really enjoyed your presentation, and thank you. And I think you offered us some really good thoughts to take away.
Well, thank you, Sue. It's hard when you're putting these things together to know where to meet everyone, but I think part of my new mission is to really try and change the image of anything, and to show that there can be life and living and joy in care homes. It's not all, and not to be Pollyannish or to say it's all wonderful. No, there are places that really need to change, but those that are ready and interested and excited to change, let's capitalize on that, and at the very least really try excuse me, or maybe approach care differently, and or include families more, or the resident in their annual care conference. Just small things can go a long way. Yeah.
Thank you, Geneviève.
Mhm.
Any more answer to your question that you open to participants in terms of what they are getting from your presentation?
Mhm.
Those, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. No hand is being up. And I think we're going towards the end of it. Would you have a last comment, Geneviève, before I close?
We need to rebrand what care homes are like for the nurses as well, so we can draw nursing students to care homes. Absolutely. I think we have to think this is very complex care, and very rewarding, and to be able to build relationships with people. And yeah, so no, but just really thank you so much. Hopefully you have my email if you're ever interested, want to chat more. I would, yes, and the quality projects, yes. That has been such a revelation. And that was really a colleague of mine approaching me and saying, hey, can we think about this as a community placements? And I said, yes, as long as we can embed some research into it, because that's really the other gap, right, in nursing education, is to strengthen that nursing research. And so it's just been really delightful. It's been really, really positive. So I will put my email in the chat here.
Thank you very much, Geneviève, again for your presentation, and thank you for all who registered for the webinar. Please note that the link to a recording of this session will be made available automatically to all those registered. Please feel free to share the link within your networks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and CASN certainly hopes you will consider joining us for our next Lunch and Learn. That will be posted on our website shortly. Have a good rest of the day, and thank you again, Geneviève.
Merci. Thank you.